2,000 years ago, a man wrote letters about wasting time, shallow friendships, and the fear of death. Every single problem he described is sitting in your pocket right now. In 1st century Rome, at the height of the most powerful empire the Western world had ever seen, a wealthy advisor to the Emperor Nero sat in his study and wrote letters to a friend named Lucidius. He was old by then, in his 60s, and he knew it. He had spent decades at the center of Roman power, accumulating wealth, navigating court politics, surviving exile, and watching people he knew die badly. And somewhere, in all of that, he had worked out a set of ideas about how to actually live, that cut through the noise of status and ambition with a precision that still hasn't been matched. His name was Lucius Annaeus Seneca. And the reason his letters read like they were written last week is not because human nature is a cliché. It's because he was describing something structural. Something in the architecture of how we spend our days that has unchanged, despite everything else that has. The central problem Seneca kept circling was one that Romans of his class understood intimately and almost nobody talked about honestly. Everyone was busy. Enormously, conspicuously busy. The social calendar was full. The obligations were endless. The demands of maintaining a reputation in a competitive society consumed the available hours at a rate that left almost no time for anything a person had actually chosen. And the assumption underneath all of it was that this was what a successful life looked like. Full, occupied, in demand. Seneca looked at the same landscape you look at every morning and said, "These people are not living. They are being lived. Your version has different decorations. Notifications instead of social calls. A calendar full of meetings nobody needed to schedule. The feeling at the end of the day that you were busy from the moment you woke up and somehow got nothing important done. The gnawing sense that time is passing faster than you can account for and you're not sure where it actually went." Seneca described all of this in letters written before the printing press existed. The specifics are different. The experience is identical. So what had he actually figured out that his contemporaries hadn't? He made a distinction that sounds simple until you sit with it long enough to feel how sharp it is. He separated time that is yours from time that is merely occupied. Most people, he observed, never examine this distinction at all. They hand their hours to whoever asks for them, treat busyness as a sign of importance, and then arrive at old age genuinely confused about where their life went. Not their money, not their health, their life, the hours themselves. He wrote to Lucilius with a kind of urgency that comes through even in translation. "Claim your time," he said, "and hold on to it. Stop letting it be grabbed from you. Stop giving it away in small pieces to people who don't value what they're receiving. Protect it with the same seriousness you'd protect anything else you couldn't get back." This sounds like productivity advice. It isn't. Seneca wasn't interested in optimization. He was interested in a more basic question. Are you spending your hours on what you actually value, or on what other people expect, or on what habit has made automatic, or on anxiety about a future that hasn't arrived yet? Because he identified 3 specific ways that time gets destroyed, and they're all still operating at full capacity today. The first is the past. Specifically, regret. Replaying what went wrong, what you should have done, what you can no longer change. Seneca was not unsympathetic to grief or reflection. He had suffered real losses. But he drew a hard line between useful examination of the past and the kind of dwelling that simply consumed present hours while producing nothing. The past is fixed. Your attention to it is not free. Every hour you spend in it is an hour you are not actually living in. The second is the future. Anxiety, the mental rehearsal of problems that may never arrive. The endless preparation for catastrophes, some of which will happen and most of which won't, all of it using up the only time you actually have. He wrote about this with particular force because Rome was a city that ran on worry, political instability, financial risk, the unpredictability of favor with powerful people. His peers were expert anxiety practitioners, and he kept pointing at the same simple fact. The feared thing either comes or it does, and if it doesn't, you have suffered it anyway in your imagination. If it does, you have suffered it twice. The third is distraction, the frittering of hours on things that are neither work nor rest nor pleasure, but some grey zone of semi-engagement that leaves you more tired than you started. He described Romans going to shows not because they enjoyed them, but because attendance was expected. Attending dinners that exhausted them for the sake of connections that never materialized. Acquiring possessions they didn't want to impress people they didn't like. The specific activities have changed completely. The structure has not moved an inch. What he recommended was not complicated and not dramatic, just honest. Decide what you actually value. Spend your hours accordingly. Defend that allocation against the countless competing demands that will frame themselves as obligations but are actually choices. And examine regularly whether you are doing it. Because the drift is constant and the default is always toward what other people want from you, rather than what you actually chose. Seneca himself was not perfectly consistent. He was rich when he preached simplicity. He served a dangerous emperor while writing about freedom from external circumstance. His critics called him a hypocrite, and they had a point. He acknowledged this. He said he was not writing from a position of having solved these problems, but from a position of working on them, and that the person learning alongside you is sometimes more useful than the person who has already arrived. That honesty is part of why the letters still work. He's not performing wisdom. He's doing it in real time, in writing, with someone he cares about, aware of his own failures. And here is the thing about him that doesn't get said enough. He was one of the wealthiest men in Rome when he chose to write about the poverty of a wasted life. He had everything the culture said would make you happy, and he spent his final years telling anyone who would read carefully that the culture was wrong. Not because wealth is evil, because wealth, like all external things, does not protect the hours. It just changes the texture of how they get taken from you. The letter that lands hardest is short. He opens it by saying that he will account for his day, as he has been doing. And then he writes something that hits like a door closing in a quiet house. He says, "Everything, Lucilius, is alien to us. Time alone is ours." Read that again. Not your money, not your reputation, not your relationships, because other people are separate from you and the future is uncertain. Time, just the hours. That's what belongs to you, and only for as long as you're alive to use them. Most people read this and feel something they don't immediately know what to do with. A slight panic, a recognition, the sense of having been told something true that they already half knew, but had been successfully avoiding. That's the right response. Sit with it. Because the reason Seneca is still worth reading to millennia after he put the letters down is not that he offers a system or a framework or a set of practices, it's that he keeps pointing at the one thing that is actually yours, and asking quietly whether you know it. Subscribe if this felt like something you needed to hear today.